Hello everybody and welcome to the Daily Splatt. Today is our second video in our series of 20 reviewing the English Premier League season 2011-2012, and today's subject, because we're running through the teams alphabetically, is Aston Villa. Oh dear. Right, let's get started. So in the preview video from about 10 months ago, if you want to go back and have a look at it, I predicted that Aston Villa would probably not have a brilliant season. I said that a few things about, obviously, Ashley Young and Stuart Downing had both left. John Carew had also left. A lot of experience had gone. And Gerard Houllier, the manager from that season, had left due to reasons of poor health. He had been replaced by Birmingham City's manager, Alex McLeish. Not a popular appointment, but obviously a manager who's had some success, winning the League Cup that year. Certainly indicative of what he can do, but he also did get Birmingham relegated, so also indicative of what he can do. So, Aston Villa, it was a bit of a weird one. I predicted that they would finish somewhere between an 11th and 15th. I didn't actually specifically say what league position on that video. I said that they had a squad that could have been capable of breaking into the top half of the table, somewhere between 8th and 10th, that sort of range, but that I didn't think they would. However, I did also say, somewhat ominously, that as long as they finish above 15th, they should be fine, otherwise questions will be asked. Aston Villa, as some of you may know, finished 16th in what was, quite simply, one of their worst seasons in the Premier League. Probably their worst season in definitely the last 5 years, and probably one of the worst in the last 10. Quite simply, Aston Villa have not been the same since Martin O'Neill left them 2 years ago. He left over money concerns, basically that he wasn't going to be allowed as much money as he wanted. He left, Gerard Houllier came in, interestingly bought Darren Bent for £24 million. Seems odd. And then, of course, Houllier left, although that was due to the fact he fell ill again, poor man. We had a brief period with Kevin McDonald. Alex McLeish came in this season. He was supposed to just sort of turn Villa around and turn them back into a top 10 side. But the problem was, all they did was sign Charles Nzogbia and Shay Given, and not much else. They've just not stepped up to the mark. There's a lot of very good young players there. Mark Albrighton, who scored the Premier League's 20,000th goal, so that's one highlight. It wasn't a 2-1 loss to Arsenal, but it's a highlight nonetheless. He had, I thought, an okay season. Barry Bannon continued to play quite well, I thought, but there were lots of disappointments. Charles Nzogbia never really got going. Gabriel Agbonlahor was very disappointing and barely threatened to be involved in England's Euro 2012 campaign at all, and of course isn't. And of course Darren Bent suffering a pretty bad injury in the early months of 2012. Ruling him out for the rest of the season made it very, very difficult for the Villains. Look, they have had a bad year, and part of it is they did lose basically, they've lost a very good midfield over the course of 2-3 seasons. You look back to that Martin O'Neill side that was doing well, and what did they have? They had a central partnership of James Milner and Gareth Barry with Young and Downing on the wings. And this is Stuart Downing pre-Liverpool days, when he actually was, pretty good. Of course, Downing went to Liverpool and pretty much did exactly what Aston Villa did this season, which was nothing. Ashley Young went off to Manchester United and had a fairly productive season. And, of course, Milner and Barry had already left the seasons before, both going to Manchester City. So, they had the heart ripped out of them, essentially. Now, they did still have a couple of good young players in there, as we've mentioned, Albrighton and Bannon. You've also got Kieran Clark at the back, who I actually think did relatively okay stepping up. Although, when you're up against the likes of Carlos Cuellar and Richard Dunn, you haven't got much competition. Collins, also in the defence, I thought was okay. I thought Warnock didn't have a great season, neither did Alan Hutton, although Shay Given did produce some very important saves, and I think he was a pretty crucial signing, because remember, Villa only finished 2 points above the relegation zone, which, quite frankly, is not good enough. Fabian Delph, another youngster who struggled to make an impact, although I still hold hope for him. I think he'll be good. And then, of course, you've got up front Nathan Delfonso, who just didn't really get that many games, and the powerhouse Emil Heskey, who continued to be basically Emil Heskey, was very, very poor, and has since been released by the club already. Also released by the club, Alex McLeish. As soon as the season was over, he was pretty confident he'd keep his job. Randy Lerner disagreed, and now they've got to start the hunt for a new manager all over again. Why was he sacked? Because, one, Aston Villa were pretty much the worst team to watch this season in the Premier League, and this was one of the most exciting Premier League seasons ever. You had both United and City just slamming goals past loads of teams. You had Arsenal either conceding a load or scoring a load. You know, you had Chelsea, who had the capacity to excite. You had Tottenham playing for a good period of time, some of the best football in the league. You had Newcastle producing amazing football. You had the promoted teams of, Swansea and Norwich just playing beautiful football. Swansea in particular were magnificent. We had Wigan with that late surge. They really showed their mettle. And then you had Aston Villa, who, quite frankly, were awful. They were unpleasant to watch. The worst game I watched this season was a Manchester United-Aston Villa game. It was at Villa Park, and United won 1-0. I watched it. It was the last night that I was over in England, when I was over there on holiday, and it was a boring match. United scored after 20 minutes with Phil Jones. Javier Hernandez and Shaker both came off injured a few minutes later, and that was it. The second half was just boring, and it was, partly it was United's fault for not playing very well, but they sort of got dragged down to Villa's level. There was like this black hole that just sort of sucked all the joy and creativity out of them, and I think that carried on for a large part of the season. Aston Villa's last win of the season came in their 28th game. The last 10 games of the season, Villa did not get a win, and that win was lucky. That was when Andreas Weimann scored in the 93rd minute to get a 1-0 win over Fulham. They were terrible. And quite frankly, they need to be changed. Obviously, there are hopes that things will change for them, and it is possible. And I think it can be turned around with the right man. There are some good young players in there. It just depends on who can be brought in. And of course, the sad news, of course, was that Stilian Petrov, the club captain, a couple of months ago, was diagnosed with acute leukemia. Now, that was a devastating blow for Villa, and obviously losing a player to ill health in any circumstances is a dreadful thing. Obviously, we saw Bolton and Fabrice Muamba. But, obviously beyond the footballing realm, that was just very, very bad for Aston Villa, and the club responded to that really well. And in a way, I'm glad, you are glad to see them stay up and find some resolve from that. But, being able to replace a player like him, on top of players they've lost, like Milner, Barry, Young, Downing, well, even though he had a bad year, it's going to be very tricky for Aston Villa. Rank for the season? F. This was a failure of a season. The fact they finished 2 points from getting relegated, Wigan finish above them. And I'm not saying, that as like, ooh, Wigan, ooh. But the point is, when you consider that round about the middle of the season, Wigan were way behind them. Wigan were way behind everyone, to be fair, but they were way behind Aston Villa. The fact they allowed themselves to get caught up in this relegation battle, it was dreadful. They just had a dreadful season. I'm not saying they're a dreadful team. They're not a very good team by Premier League standards, but I think they can be turned around. I think some of those young players can come good. I think a fully fit Darren Bent is going to be very, very handy for them if he stays at the club. But unfortunately, it is an F this season. They did fail to turn things around. They have become even worse, and if they get much more worse, they're going down, and that's the simple fact of it. Okay, so that is it for my review of Aston Villa. I thought it was relatively fair. It's obviously it's opinion and conjecture, but I am trying to keep it balanced. Tomorrow, Blackburn Rovers. Woohoo! Can't wait to get into that one. Yeah. Yes, we'll be reviewing the season of Blackburn Rovers. Certainly a very interesting year at Ewood Park, and make sure you tune in here tomorrow to hear about it. Okay, until then, bye-bye.